everyone, and welcome back. If you've read the Jewish guidebook for the museum in Liepaja in Latvia, and you've had a look at the introduction video, you'll be all ready to watch this second and final part. And this is where the real meat and potatoes happens. This is the exciting bit for us as we find out more about the Schnitt and Schwarz family before they migrated in 1906, but a little bit afterwards as well. One that I've divided it up into 8 parts to make it a little easier if you have to go back to something or want to rewatch something or can add any information to what I've got listed here. I'm very familiar with all this now because I've been working on it for so many months, but I know it will be new and some startling information for the rest of you. So part 1, let's start with my DNA story and what we know for sure. When I got my DNA results back, I was fairly excited to see that it was correct. If you look here, we've got the Baltic states, but the darker purple is supposed to say fine-tune where the results are from, and you'll see it appears to be right here on the Lithuanian and Latvian border. Now, if you're on the ocean there, the Baltic Sea, and you drive about an hour and a half north of this border, that's where Libau is. So I was fairly impressed with the DNA results. I didn't do the health ones, I just did the swab that tells you where you're from. So, ta-da, how exciting was it to be 100% something? I'm 100% Ashkenazi Jew, traced back to just the one ethnicity, as you saw on the geographical map, together with this information was very exciting. Now, I needed to find out a little bit more about the Ashkenazi, so you probably know a little bit more about this than I do, but first of all, we were part of a European diaspora whose origins are traced back to Germany and France, and then later migrated towards the Slavic countries and Poland and the like. But because of tradition, marriage practices, and segregation from surrounding cultures, the Ashkenazi Jewish population is genetically very close-knit. And weren't the Schnitts in Los Angeles a wonderful example of that closeness, especially when you think back to memoirs like Ron Abel's, where he points it out that they were so close and how wonderful it was, that they all lived within just a short few blocks from each other and were often together. But this Ashkenazi Jewish population, due to persecution, genocide, and the total devastation of the Holocaust, they migrated all across the world. And the largest population went to the USA and Israel, but they also went to the former Soviet Union, South Africa, and Australia. So I'm not an expert on this religion, but I thought it was great how this Jewish culture is so family-based and so close. And they also have a strong emphasis on learning. So we only hold about 2% of the world's population, but we hold a quarter of all Nobel Peace and Prize wins. So that was very good to hear in my studies also. I want to say that when I arrived in the Baltics, it took a little while, but I realized that there's just about no Jewish people there. Luckily, I'll be able to introduce you to a few, but in reality, they were decimated in the Holocaust, and they all immigrated to other places. In fact, the places that I visited, like Liepaja and Aspute, Hasenpauth, and the Guldinga region, there were no synagogues there left anymore. Go on to part 2. So I'll introduce our research experts who helped make this project possible. They are so dedicated Jewish organizations, local historians, researchers, archivists, travel agents, tour guides, interpreters, museums, cemeteries, and curators all helped to make this project possible. And so that we could learn a little bit more, or a lot more, I should say, about Abraham Schnitt and Yetta Schwartz's early life. First of all, I'd like to introduce Rita Bogdanova. I was introduced to her by the curator at the Jewish Museum in Riga, Riga being the capital of Latvia. And I Googled a little bit about her and found an interesting fact that she was on the TV show Following Your Roots, Find My Roots, and Who Do You Think You Are. She actually helped the celebrity Quincy Jones's daughter, actress Rhodesia Jones, find her roots, and they led them to Latvia and into Latvia because the mother is Peggy Lipton, who an actress and turned out to be a Latvian Jew. So I thought this would be great to reach out to her. She's been working for us since April 2017. She came back with dozens of official documents from the Latvian State Archives that I'll be able to share with you. So if you get to Riga, she is absolutely the person to talk to. It was wonderful to use her services. Next, I can introduce you to Alana, who is actually in Liepaja. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see that the front building, the yellow one, is the small Jewish museum there, and that's where the guidebook was published. I spent some time in there, and then back into that more Soviet-style building, brick building back behind, is where Alana's offices are. I was so fortunate to spend a few hours with her one afternoon. She also helped clarify and interpret the Russian and some of the documents I'm going to show you. She felt like such a warm, wonderful person, like an old Jewish aunt, and she was so helpful. I want to say on her behalf that the foundation I've already introduced you to in the introduction video, but also that they're having a world reunion of Liepaja or Lebau jewelry next year, 2018, in July from the 5th to the 8th, and everyone is invited. I don't think I'll be able to go, but I encourage anyone that can travel to Liepaja to do so. This slide here introduces you to Madra and Gunnars. They arrived at our hotel the following morning after we arrived, and we couldn't have had a better tour with them over the course of 2 days. Madra speaks English. She's an English and German teacher at a middle school, but Gunnars, although he's a professor and a historian, he doesn't speak English, so we needed both of them. You'll see them sitting at a table in the lobby of the hotel we were staying at, and they came very prepared and they had an itinerary planned, but they wanted to talk about exactly what we wanted to see on our tour. I want to point out that he's holding a book by Edward Anders on Liepaja jewelry, and I'm going to show you more about that because that book is a great resource, but both of them were wonderful tour guides. Gunnars actually used his own car to drive us around, and then we would park and take walks together with Madra, of course, interpreting and speaking English as quick as she could. A little bit about Edward Anders. He was born in Latvia in 1926, and of course he was there in the Holocaust, and he's dedicated his life as a historian and college professor to write books about the experience. He also testified at the Nuremberg trials in 1948. I reached out to him to say hi via email from Gunnars, which is an old friend of his, but he's 91 years old, so I thought I could have visited with him here in California, even though it's Northern California, but I could not. But he did write back a very nice email. His research, though, is solely what happened during the Holocaust and not focusing at all, like I was, on pre-1906 history. But it was interesting to have a correspondence with him. So I want to say that he has written a couple of books, and you can Google him and find them as well. It's very interesting. Now down below is Ziggy. He actually gives free walking tours in Lebau, Liepaja, both the same place, of course. He was fantastic. He showed up at the hotel the night before I met Gunnars and Madra. He was an absolute card. He came in, it was freezing cold and in the evening, so he comes in shorts. He's about 6'8", I think, and he swears like a trooper, which I really like that sort of stuff, so I found him wonderful. He picked me up, took me in his car, and we drove and walked around the city. He was so down to earth, knowledgeable, and passionately intelligent about history. So I learned so much from him, and I'm hoping to show you what he showed me. I also mentioned to you that we've been in the Jewish Museum in Liepaja twice with the help of both of these historians also. so you're going to see them throughout the slides. And finally, Agita at the travel agency in Liepāja. So at Liepāja Travel. Just fantastic. Speaks English, great communicator. Put me in touch with Gunnars and Madra. Couldn't have done the trip without her. I highly recommend that anyone else that wants to go deal with her directly. She's fantastic, and all of her services are free, if you can believe that or not. And for the other guides, if you're thinking about how much that cost, they were relatively inexpensive also, maybe 120 euro a day, and hiring Rita for all of the documents that she gave to us was only maybe 250 euro, and Alana's office at the foundation, all of her services were free, which was so fortunate for us as a family. We used all of their services, hopefully wisely enough to be able to do this presentation for you today. So we'll move along to part 3. I've introduced you geographically to the Baltic states, so that's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But I want to tell you a little bit more about the RMS Umbria. We actually have the ship's manifest, and when Ron Abel was doing his memoirs, he makes note that he never knew which ship they came over on. So I think it would be so wonderful for him to know if he was here today. I hope he does know in some small way. So I'm bringing up a map for you again as you're becoming a. You have Latvia. I pointed out Riga, which is the capital. I point out Labau or Liepāja, which is where our ancestors come from. I put a note here of Palanga, Lithuania, because that's where we flew into. We actually flew from Copenhagen to Palanga, only about 50 minutes, quite a fast jet. Directly after, we did a cruise of the Baltic. We were in Stockholm, St. Petersburg, Estonia, and down into Germany and back to Copenhagen. So since we were so close, rather than flying into Palanga from Germany, we left right from Copenhagen. And it was in October, as I pointed out, and it was pretty cool and pretty stormy in October. Oh, and I also want to point out the Schwarzes. Yedasai was born in Hasenpov in the Aspute region. And this Kuldinga, you'll hear me talk about that. That was the Jewish region that they lived in also. And it holds a lot of history for us. And then I want to just point out Zarazai, Lithuania, which will make sense as I go along. I'm glad I get to show you some pictures of the area too. It was very beautiful. Latvia is very flat, and there were storms and rain every day, and I know they were having terrible flooding, but it was very interesting to see from the sky. You can see that we had to cross the border into Latvia from Lithuania after landing in Palanga, which is a small regional airport in Lithuania, right on the coastline. Now, Liepāja itself. So Labau was a German name for this city, and it's on all of the ancestors' documentation like we've talked about. But now they call it Liepāja or Liepāja, depending on what they're talking about. And as you can see from this marketing brochure, that it's being heavily marketed as a tourist destination. They're on Facebook and they're on multimedia, and you can see the Baltic Sea in the background there. Of course, it has a different meaning for us, and the dichotomy is lost on our family, obviously, after what we've been through, but I'm just pointing that out to you now. I love this photo here, this aerial shot, because I've talked about Liepāja, and now you can see a great deal of it from here. So this is the trade canal where our actual this shipping canal here is a narrow, shallow river with a small lake at the right and away from the sea that empties out, as you can see, straight into the Baltic Sea. They wouldn't have been able to get through this bridge here. This is a non-movable bridge, but there's a bridge on a counterlever up here, so they would have sailed through that. And you can see some naval vessels here on the left-hand side. The hotel we stayed at, the Lababa, is here on this side of the bridge. Built in 1772, it was a customs house. It wasn't destroyed because the Nazis didn't find that much value in it, because you couldn't get your ships underneath this small bridge to get to the hotel, and the hotel did sit in some rack and ruin, but it's been refurbished, and I'll show you a couple more pictures. It's absolutely the place to stay, and the staff were so wonderful to us when we were staying there. I'm glad to be able to show you the hotel from the front, because it only has 7 hotel rooms. It's a boutique hotel. It's got a lovely restaurant underneath and a wonderful atrium here. So it's called the Lababa. It's next to their brand new opera house, they call it, made out of amber, a stone that's been mined in that area of the world for a long time, and all through the Baltics they sell it. And it is an opera theater, theater house, playhouse, concert hall. It's quite great. So, and this body of water here is, like I was talking about, it's the trade canal. And just one last shot of the trade canal. This is a photograph that I took when we arrived there. So you can see it was a gray, kind of dismal day in October, but we were excited to be there. And we were free to walk around the area and walk along the river as much as we wanted to. And you can see out to the far reaches where our ancestors would have sailed from. We now know that the Schnitt family departed on board the RMS Umbria, and they went right along the trade canal we've seen in the videos. They left on the 28th of July in 1906 and arrived into Ellis Island on the 5th of August. So I didn't make that little video of the ship that you just saw, but I thought it was perfect for this presentation. Gives you a good look at the RMS Umbria. Here it is again, docked in Liverpool. The ship did stop in Liverpool along its way to the United States and to Ellis Island. This wouldn't have been the exact day that our family was there, but it gives you a good idea of what it would look like on the time. As you can see here, we got a copy of the ship's passenger manifest. I wanted to point out that because we actually found our family right here in the upper left-hand corner. We'll take a closer look also. The handwriting is all the same on this because it would have been written by the immigration officer at the port. At first I thought it was Abraham's own handwriting, and I just thought that was fantastic to see it, but no, that isn't the case, of course, after further investigation. So let's have a closer look. So we have Abraham or Abram Schmidt. It almost looks like he's got an M and a D in his name. We're going to find a great deal of discrepancy in how their names were spelt, their ages, and their relations as we go along. But this was very common back in those days. So, and you have to think about what it would have been like on the dock for them. They're explaining their names to someone who doesn't speak their language. So we can see, I'm not saying that the mistakes were made on purpose, but there's certainly some mistakes here. Let's have a look. Rose is actually Yetta. Son is actually Jenny. Guilt is Edith. Esther is Etta. Isaac is Iddy. Rakim is Nathan. David is David. And Anza is little baby Anne. There's nothing on here that is my writing. All right, so I want to point out that they've given their ages. They're slightly wrong too. I mean, we want to point out Jenny's actually 26 here. They've got her as 19. We also have her listed as a servant, not as a child. So we were wondering about that. We do have them from Russia. We have them from Labao. We have Edie. We have Etta as 6, which would have been her correct age, crossed out and then turned into a 9. Izzy, Nathan, David, and little baby Anne was the infant of the group, as you can see here. And I think we all know that the child Joseph, he did not board the RMS Umbria. He actually came to America later. The story is he came to America later illegally as a stowaway, and that Abraham paid for him to go back and come in legally, which he did out of Paris, but I don't have that information yet. I've highlighted this area too, that he says he's meeting a relative named Jenny when he gets into New York. He says that they're seeing an uncle. Now this made the Seeligs of Seattle think that they were our relatives, okay, and that this Jenny belonged to us in some way, and that it was a sister of Yetta's. But all of my research shows that she did not have a sister, Jenny, but not saying that that's 100% correct either, because like I said, information was lost and broken. You can see that Abraham says he's coming to see Aaron Seelith, which was Aaron Seelig. We have our relative, in quotations, wonderful Marty Seelig in Seattle, who's done a lot of work in regards to genealogy and done a lot for our family as well, but we'll have a closer look on it as we go away. It says that you could meet a relative or a friend, and we have to think about Abraham. He came himself by himself alone in 1905, and he would have known the lay of the land. One of the biggest fears would have been to be deported for any reason once you arrived. So maybe he thought it was better to say that their friends were relatives rather than just friends, and that's just me surmising. Abraham saying that he, to his name, maybe $25 more, and he is saying that who paid for the passage? Himself, and that he's a husband and a father. Abraham also tells Border Control that none of them have been in an insane asylum. He's not a polygamist. He's not an anarchist. That their mental health and their physical health is good. And he says, no, none of them are crippled. I just wanted to point out that down at the bottom of the manifest, you've got a few deportations right when they arrived, and that is just on this one-page document. So being deported would have been a fear for anybody coming in at that time. Moving on to part 4, and from 1906 to the current day, 2017, and a warm welcome to Modern Labao, Liepāj, with our Latvian expert tour guide, Ziggy. The first night in Liepāj was the walking tour with Ziggy, and it was just fantastic. He showed me right around the city, and of course the first thing he showed me was the memorial to the Jewish synagogue that is no longer, but there's a picture of it there to the right. The synagogues as explained before, were used to hole up the Jewish people before they were exterminated, and then the Nazis would destroy the synagogues. So there aren't any left in the region at all. And this is the actual sidewalk with a small memorial to that synagogue that was. I wanted to point out too that Zygmunt took me to this building, and you can see the dedication on the right hand side. This family, Robert and Joanna Sudels, hid 11 Jews from 1943 to 1945 and saved their lives. So the building is a historic monument right in the heart of Leapai as well. It's kind of like an Anne Frank house, if that makes sense. And much is written about this family by Edward Anders, the historian, as well. Okay, moving along, part 5 already, following in the footsteps of the Schnitt brothers from Novo Alexandrovsk, now known as Zarazai, Lithuania. So most of us, I didn't know till now that we are Lithuanian as well, because that's where Abraham came from. We also didn't know that he had a brother, except for there was an indication in Edie's memoirs that an uncle would come to high holidays, an only uncle, and that he would eat and drink, and he loved to drink schnapps. And when I got information from the Latvian State Archives about this uncle, and I had read Edie's memoirs, things were starting to come together a little bit. So let's have a look at a map from Libau. I think 300 or 400 kilometers. I wondered, and you might too, how Abraham would have crossed that landscape. It's pretty flat, but horse and cart, horse, it's an awful long way. So I want to note that through this paperwork he's called Avram, or Abraham. He was the son of Joshua Schnitt in Novo Alexandrovsk, Lithuania. And Abraham, as we're going to call him because that's how we knew him, was born circa 1860. Now, there's some interesting information. By the time he arrives in Libau, over here on the coastline, Leapai, documents show that he was about 26 years old, but that he arrived there with a woman named Etta. He also arrived with 2 children in tow, Jenny, who was 6, and Joseph, who was 2 years old. This information suggests that Abraham Schnitt may have had a first wife. Rita found her name as Etta, but she couldn't find her surname or where she had come from. So it does make things a little more difficult, and we're surmising. But I must say, she knew that Etta was born in 1863, making her 2 years younger than our Yetta. So we start to think about, was Yetta actually the biological mother of Jenny and Joseph? It's something to think about as I show you some further documents. And we also want to think about how he would have met Yetta and how she would have had 2 children like Joseph and Jenny, and then had such a large gap, like 6 years or more, until she had her next child, Edith. Most of us have this photograph circa 1910 in New York City of Abraham Schnitt. But I want to reflect back on a minute about his immigration pattern. If he immigrated from Lithuania to Libau, which made sense at the time, because during the 1880s, Jewish life was prosperous there in Libau, and Jewish people were at the forefront. They were business owners, merchants, and in Edie's memoir, she also mentioned that they weren't the poorest of the poor, that Abraham was just a different kind of Jew. And what that was really saying was is that he wasn't from the Goldingen region Jews. He was from Lithuania, and that made him maybe even a little bit of an outcast. She did say that he did not go to the local synagogue and felt that he was a little bit of an outsider, but probably because he was Lithuanian. So he's immigrating again here. He's immigrated from Lithuania to Latvia, and now he's immigrating from Latvia to the USA, and he arrives in New York, where there's no doubt that they were probably poorer than they could have possibly imagined. Most of us have this photo too, circa 1914 on West Jefferson in Los Angeles. Sad part is only a short 4 years later, Abraham Schnitt would die of the Spanish flu pandemic that swept through Los Angeles during that time. Talked a little bit that we found Abraham's father in Lithuania. His name was Joseph Schnitt. Now, we know he had two sons. He had Abraham and Hillel. Hillel will be called on documents Hillel, Gebel, but he is the same person. So we know that Abraham marries Yetta, and we also know that Hillel married a woman named Ida. So our Ita, her last name was Bro, and she married this younger brother by about 4 years of Abraham's, but they never had children. Thought it was ironic also that the brother, known as an illiterate, gets married, has no children, and lives all the way till 1931. And Abraham, who makes the big journey to the New World, tragically dies before him in 1918. This is one of quite a few official documents that we have in the presentation. This one I'm going to labor over a little bit. The rest we'll go through quite quickly, but you'll know you can always get a copy of them. And some of them, of course, are in Russian. This one's in English. But it starts to lay the foundation for what a puzzle putting this genealogical research together was. We do have his name. Now, without Abraham Schnitt, we know that without his determination and tenacity to actually come to the New World twice and set up family there, that none of us would be here. So much credit to him. Like many of them, they got their naturalization papers right before the war started. It would have been a very scary time for them as immigrants, but he shows that he's from Lebau, Russia. He says he's a tailor. He says where he lived, and we're acquainted with that address in Los Angeles. He's come via Liverpool. He's on the Umbria, so that part of the puzzle makes sense to us. But then he says he's born in 1866, when his birth records show he was born in 1860. And he's got his signature down here. But I want to say that dates, names, they were a little bit in flux throughout the course of the documents I got, and also of what they knew about themselves could have been a little askew as well. There's two things that I can't wait to show you until the end of the presentation because this is really something. We have found Abraham Schnitt's gravestone right here in Los Angeles at the Beth Israel Cemetery. Marty Seelig did a lot of work out of Seattle to find this for us, and he's also ordered and paid for death certificates. I don't have them yet to put them into the presentation, but I should have them soon. The next most fabulous surprise, and of course from Marty also, is finding Yetta's gravestone. And it's so fancy, and it's got her photo on it. We just can't believe it. So it's also at the Beth Israel Cemetery off Downey in East LA. I haven't been there yet, but I'm definitely going to see the gravestones. It was such a good find. And this one here, though, shows that Yetta was born in 1864, but her actual documents, her birth documents, show that she was born in 1861. Go back to Gunars and Madra for a minute, and that first morning that we met them, as they mapped out our tour, our day tour of Liepāja. And I can take you along that tour with some photographs and videos. I think you'll really enjoy it. One of the first places that we went was to the Jewish cemetery. That's it back behind us. Upon close inspection, you'll see that it's quite rack and ruin from the Nazi era. This is a Holocaust memorial. It's one part of it. I'll show you the other part as well. We're looking across to the other side of the cemetery. It's quite large, where it has the Lutheran, Catholic, and Russian Orthodox area. They were quite well kept, beautiful flowers and trees. So very different, the two sides of the cemetery, but very interesting to go to. Part of the memorial is the Liepāja Jewish Cemetery Holocaust Memorial Wall. What I'm looking at is lists and lists of names of people who are known to have died in the Holocaust. I'm looking under S for Schnitt and Schwarz, but I can't see any Schnitts, just like Schnittke, which is definitely not us, and Smits. Fortunately, however, there's a plethora, same way that we spell our Schwarz. So I can point out to you. Down the bottom here is a relative of ours. I'm going to introduce you to more about her as we go along. And there's others that could be related as well, but if I find Riva, Ida's mother. They lived together. She was a widow at the time, and her daughter was a spinster that lived with her in her late 30s. Both perished in the Holocaust. It says their ages. If I go back to Riva, Ita, her daughter, who's our relative, she's either about 35 or 38 years old in the Holocaust. She was lost along with all of these other Schwartzes as well. Madra and Gunars took us driving and walking on our day trip. One of the first places they took us to was the home of our ancestors in Liepāja. They're still standing in complete disrepair, but on the inside, they're being lived in. So here we are on our first stop with Gunars and Madra, number 14, Kermages Prospectus. This is a home that would have been built in the late 1880s. The Schnitt brothers would have lived there. Now, we have a long-lost uncle that I'm going to tell you all about, Uncle Hillel, that Abraham had a younger brother that also immigrated from Lithuania to Latvia. In 1921, his known address is this house right here, and it was just amazing to be standing there. If you look above my head, you'll see a little white plastic flower pot hanging above the doorway. That's a sign that tells people that there are occupants in the house. It's still occupied. I have no idea what it would look like in the inside, but you can see quite clearly the disrepair of the outside. I want to show you just a brief video of the building as well. We're just standing in the doorway, knowing that our ancestors would have been there in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We know that Hillel Schnitt lived until 1931. We know he outlived his brother Abraham because Abraham was killed in the Spanish flu pandemic in Los Angeles in 1918. So it's very ironic that he outlived his brother there, but this is where he lived. And it was quite amazing to be in the same spot. But we've also get to go to some other relatives' houses as well, and I'll be able to show you that as well. And here we have it, an actual photograph of Uncle Hillel Schnitt, 1884 to 1931. Quality isn't that good, but we found it to be so important to our research. I wanted to share it with everybody here. And I also have quite a few documents telling us more about his life after his brother left for the United States. We have quite a few wonderful historic documents on Hillel Schnitt from Rita at the Latvian State Archives. This is actually his birth certificate, albeit in Russian, from 1864. We have a copy of his passport book. Both he and his wife Ida applied for citizenship together in Latvia. We have a copy of their citizenship application. It's written in someone else's hand. He was illiterate, and it says that on the bottom on the right-hand side. They're also calling him Giebels Josella Schnitt. So we have these discrepancies in the puzzle of our historical project, with names being spelled incorrectly, dates being incorrect. So that's a pretty steady theme. Upon closer inspection here, you'll also see that Uncle Hillel is called Giebels Josella. Is it that his name was Giebels and that at his death they got his name wrong? Is it that his name was correct at the end and vice versa? This is just one of those examples that show we're coming up with more questions than answers, and exactly what makes this research such a puzzle. I mentioned he was married, and he and Ida have no children that are known to us, but here's a passport photo of her from 1932. One of the biggest surprises for us, of course, was finding that he was buried in the local Liepaja Jewish cemetery. We'd already been there once with Gunnars and Madra, but on the day before we were flying out back to Copenhagen and back to Germany, we just had to go back for one more look because it appeared they found his exact plot and we wanted to see it. I want to introduce one of the experts, Edward Kaplan. He didn't speak any English, so it was a bit of a difficult day. It was pouring rain and freezing cold, and we were minutes from having to leave for the airport back down to Lithuania. But we were on a mission because we had gotten this information that Uncle Hillel was buried at that local cemetery. So of course we wanted to go pay our respects at his grave. The next couple of videos show you what we found there. Walking through the graveyard. I want to say that we followed Edward all the way to this corner of the cemetery, and just how shocking it was that we came across his grave and it was just a grassy knoll. Our first inclination was just to pick the weeds. We didn't want to step right on the grave, but we could see the gravestones around us, so it was a little perplexing. But even though he didn't speak English, he was pointing out the graves to the right and the left to make sure we knew that this was Hillel's spot. Again, his death records show his name as Hillel. His immigration papers and passport books say Giebels or Giebel or Gibeli. So at this point, we're just calling him Uncle Hillel because that's what he was called at his death. But we could go either way, couldn't we?
What's her name?
Schnitt.
Amen.
I could only understand a few of the words that Edward was speaking in his prayer from his prayer book, but perhaps it was the Yizkor, which says, "May the Lord remember the soul of our Uncle Hillel, who has gone to his world, because, without making a vow, I shall give to charity on his behalf. As reward for this, may his soul be bound in the bond of life, together with the souls of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, and together with the other righteous men and women in the Garden of Eden. Amen." I wanted to show you a few of the well-kept graves that were nearby. And a closer look at the type of headstone we can get where it says, "Remembered by his descendants, rest in peace." That family would have also come across an unmarked grave. And the stonemason there is Marx, who I introduced you to earlier. He's been making the stonework for over 20 years. It's organized through Alana, but they can't do it through these winter months. The ground is too hard and it's too cold, of course. Just an aside, Hillel's wife is married again to what you would call a Mr. Greenfield, Shalom Grunfeld. This is a picture from his 1927 passbook. I don't know if they were divorced and he was a new husband or she married him after Hillel died in 1931. She actually passed away in 1935, and both her and this fellow, the second husband, are buried in the same cemetery. Welcome to part 6. We're going to leave those wonderful Schnitt brothers behind and the history of them immigrating from Lithuania to Latvia. And we're going to pick up with Yetta Schwarz, of course, before she became Yetta Schnitt. I'm going to show you where her family comes from and a little bit about her life before she immigrated with her husband in 1906 to the USA. So we've looked more familiar with Latvia as we go along. This Saspute region is halfway between Liepaja and Goldinga. Jews were stratified or classified in Jewish regions. So we've got the Goldinga region. They're known as to be from the Goldinga region, but born in Hasenpauth. And this isn't that far of a journey, probably less than an hour in total all the way up, but still 3 or 4 hours away from Riga. And you can see how Liepaja is right on the coast. When I went on the day tour with Madra, we went to the Goldinga region in search of information and passed through Aspute. In retrospect, I really should have stopped there first, and I hope to get some more information from that area because we find that we've got quite a few Schwarz relatives all born here in Hassenpah. Aren't these lovely photographs of Yetta? Some of you that are older than me, of course, will remember her so much better. She probably died, well, just about 11 years before I was born. But these are treasured photos, obviously. Reminder here that we did find Yetta's gravestone in East LA, and Lynn and I are going there sometime next week, so I hope to be able to tell you about it when I see you next time. We haven't been able to go. We were due to go a few days ago, but these fires have been so bad that we haven't been able to get out of Ventura County. The gravestone, the Jewish writing on the gravestone just says something about Rochelle Hinda, which we know is her real name, just to let you know. And just a reminder that Marty has ordered the death certificates, and hopefully I have them soon. Here we get to see Yetta perhaps in her early 50s. This is circa 1915. I think in Los Angeles. We've got Morris Isaacman in the middle, Etta's husband. We can tell by his fabulous ears. Jenny would have been 35, Edie 26, and Anne would have been about a 9-year-old. I wonder if anybody knows or recognizes those buildings where they could tell us where that is in Los Angeles. That would be interesting. This photo shows the strong, beautiful, close-knit Schnitt sisters, and this is a testament to their lovely family. I think these women look so beautiful and interesting here. I love this photo the most. It's time now to have a closer look, though, at Yetta's marriage to Abraham Schnitt and her family from the early days. Part 7. The marriage of Abraham Schnitt and Yetta Schwarz. What this shows us here is Abraham and Yetta were married. I don't have a marriage certificate or know where they got married. We still have that strange situation going on of another woman that might have been Jenny and Joseph's real mother. I want you to still be thinking on if that was possible. This lists the children that were with them as we know it. Jenny, Joseph, Edie, Izzy, little baby Iser, who only lived maybe a year or less, Nathan, and twins, Dave and Etta Schnitt. That's one of those major surprises I was telling you about before, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that with the documentation as we go along. You can imagine it was a shock to myself and to anybody else I told. We all thought it could not in any way possible be true, but after all of the experts I've introduced you to confirmed it to be so, it's just an interesting turn of events. And we've got little baby Anne Schnitt down the bottom. This is another way of looking at all of the children. So Jenny was spelled or said Shine, Sown, Sos, Jenny, called by those different names. You've got Joseph, and then you're going to see a big gap between 1884 and 1889. Now, did Abraham then meet Yetta, and are the next children Yettas? Since documents show that he arrived in Labau with a woman named Etta and Jenny and Joseph at 6 and 2 years old already. Just an interesting supposition. You've got Edie, Izzy, Iser, Nathan, Dave, Etta, and Anne. If you think back to the Latvian experts I showed you in the beginning of this presentation, I could not believe what they were telling me about Etta and Dave either. But once the documents were translated independently, I guess the proof was in the pudding for us. I did organize the interpretations, separately from each other and didn't give anybody any clues. And by finding out that Etta and Dave are twins, here we have more questions than answers, as I said from the beginning. It's just one of those things that are really hard to believe. For me, I think that they just were never told, or it was just downplayed to such a degree. I don't even think Etta knew for sure or knew that she was a twin, because in her handwritten memoirs, she writes that she asked Yetta about twins in the family, because maybe she was hearing the word twins a lot around her by the older kids. But she says Yetta always said to her, "Oh, I had twins, but I miscarried them." So I don't know if that's one of those lies that perpetuated itself. As cousins, we have to imagine the reasons why such a thing was kept secret in the first place. And I did talk to Alana at the foundation in Leapai about that, and most things were based around fear. You could see from the ship's manifest that the names and the ages were different. He even called Jenny a servant instead of a child, and her age was vastly different. Also, this fear about being deported. One problem was you couldn't bring in other people's children, like sneak children in. If they would have said, no, these are twins, well, how could they have been? Also, we know that Abraham went to America the year before in 1905, and he would have been well aware of what were the best decisions to make to be able to come into America and not be deported, and also would have been the best in the ways of getting financial aid, any kind of welfare when they arrived. How many children could you bring? Like we showed on the manifest, he says he's coming to see an uncle when really it was a friend. And over the whole course of the project, what we realized is that without Abraham's tenacity and determination, none of us would be here. I mean, he's such a strong, smart individual, no doubt about it. And Yetta, her strength and courage to even get on a boat with a little babe in arms, only a couple months old, is just hard to even imagine. Let's move along, because we have a little bit more information about these children that I want to share with you now. Jenny, as you guys know, married Max Platt. She's buried at Hillside Memorial Park out near LAX. Same as Erwin Isaacman and Yetta Isaacman. I wanted to put down exactly where they were buried in the cemetery in case you wanted to go visit. I've been there once or twice recently. I used to go every time I flew in from Australia. For 20 years, Dad and I, would head straight from the airplane up to the cemetery and see Grandma, Etta, and the relatives, and then head down to a fabulous diner there that had the best food before heading out to the valley and home. It was good memories. Of course, the infamous Joseph Schnitt, 1884 to 1914. He didn't get on the boat. It said that when Yetta found out he wouldn't board with them on the gangplank, that she just fainted right away. He is absolutely so handsome, and he was a very determined individual to be staying behind and working for the revolution and fighting for human rights and all the rest. He'd been in some trouble before they left, and there's a story that they were leaving Latvia because of him. He'd already been incarcerated. Evie's memoirs show he'd been questioned, incarcerated. The house had been raided. He was passing out leaflets, and then he didn't board the ship and he didn't come, and he ended up in a Siberian war camp. Another fabulous historic photograph, this one of the third child, Edie. Her memoirs actually contributed a great deal to this project, especially in writing about an uncle and putting two and two together there. So we appreciate that so much from her. It's a beautiful photograph. This wonderful photograph of Izzy and Minnie Schnitt is provided by Jeff Brooks. So I'm so grateful for that. It's just wonderful, better than anything that I had. And of course you'll notice I am still listing where everyone is buried. So Hillside Memorial Park here for them as well. Say a little bit about the fifth child, Iser, 1883 to 1894. So yet a certainly lost child there. He was not a twin though. She actually had three children pass away before her when she died in 1948. That would be incredibly sad in itself. And here is the infamous Uncle Nathan. We all have our memories about Uncle Nathan. He was a fantastic character, that's for sure. But you'll notice with both him and Joseph, I don't have any burial information or where they might be buried at. So if anybody does, please share that information. That would be great to know. I'm going to veer away for just a second to my grandmother Etta and her brother Dave Schnitt. I'm calling them twins because categorically, after dealing with all the respected experts, this is what I believe to be true. I want to show you a few of the documents that helped me to come to that conclusion. And yes, it's the oddest thing in the world that we never knew, or that perhaps they never knew. But isn't it wonderful that they were close their whole life? And that's the great thing about it. So let me just show you a few of the official documents from the Latvian State Archives, and you can think about this situation of newfound twins in the family. The birth certificate of Etta and Dave Schnitt. I would have never known that they were twins, but Rita highlighted it to me. And so I was on a cruise and I was going to Russia out of Copenhagen before I went to Latvia, and I thought, I'm going to go attend a Russian seminar, how to speak a little bit of Russian before we got to St. Petersburg, and see if I can get that crew member to decipher and interpret this document for me. I didn't tell her what it said or that I was looking for twins. I just gave her the name Schnitt. And this is the letter she came back to. Over here on the right, good evening, it's Monica. I was trying to read the copy you gave me after Russian class. I found some information about the names you mentioned. Most of the names look like Jewish. Number 36 at the bottom of the page includes the information about David and Estera. That's how they are spelled on the copy. There is information about the names of parents. The quality is not too good. It's hard to read, but the father looks Jewish, Abraham, or A something similar to that. It says where he was born, and then she mentions Alex Zandroska, which we know is in Lithuania, where he was born. She says, I guess the last name is also Jewish, that's why it's hard to read, but it's something like Schmidt. The mother's name can also be Wanda or Linda. The first letter is very hard to read, and I hope that this helps you a little bit. Well, it was quite a shock for Alan and I. We had to really sit down and read this when she delivered it back. The Wanda or Linda is, Yetta's real name is Rochelle Hinda on her birth document, so that's probably what it says there. She's put these post-it notes on it, this girl Monica from the cruise ship, so just pointing out to me that females are on the left and males are on the right. So what we have for us is she mentions the 36 and a boy and a girl. This is the family story that she's telling us. And she writes here in her own hand that they're twins. So we're starting to believe what we're seeing, but very slowly, as you can imagine. If I bring you back to the ship's manifest, just briefly, we've got Esther, Etta, and David here. I have no idea why they had her correct age there of 6 and crossed it out and changed it to 9, nor why they called David as a 4-year-old when he would have been 6. Like we've talked about, fear, economic reasons, and in with this fear takes us to the point, as history and time went along, if they ever got caught in this lie later, would they have been deported? Anything could have been going through their mind of why they perpetuated this situation about not advertising to the world that those two were twins. Here's another copy of the birth certificate, a little clear. What you've got here is you've got 36 is the girl, 35 is the boy. Esther and David here, the story of their parents is here. And all of these other entries that you see are just different families at different times, either that day or the day before or the day after. They're actual, not separate birth certificates like what we have today, but birth books they're called. Fabulous picture of Dave Schnitt, isn't it? He's also buried up at Hillside with the family, which is great as well. Here's my beautiful Grandma Etta. She wouldn't have liked this picture because she would have thought she was fat, but with the steroids for the tuberculosis, that's how she would have looked that day. But her weight definitely fluctuated. And she's also buried up at Hillside with the rest of the family. And her son Erwin is not far away. Finally, everyone, that 9th special child, the little babe in arms that left in 1906. How brave was she and her mother. Again, buried at Hillside Memorial Park near the rest of the family. This is actually a photograph from their 40th wedding anniversary, her and Marie Sabel. So I was really glad to come across this photo. I think it was supplied to me earlier by Bruce. We're going to move on now to their ancestors, who are our ancestors as well. So just stand by. All right, everyone, moving along, Part 8, the Schwarz family tree from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, the Goldinga Jewish community, and Hassenpoth near Aspute, where the Schwarzes were born. Just to keep my mind straight, Yetta's great-great-grandfather was Isaac Schwarz. Yetta's great-grandfather was Hirsch. Yetta's grandfather was Jonas. And Yetta's father was Isaac. And we'll go over that a few times, but you can always come back to this information. I know I might go a bit quick here because I'm familiar with it, but I'll do the best I can. Documents from the archives, the family list from 1835 in the Goldinga region near Aspute, Hassenpoth. If we look closely here, by looking at our Schwarzes, Hirsch, Jonas, there was a child born, Benjamin Abraham. In fact, I think all of the ticks are our family. And their ages, I looked up their ages and they're about correct. So we'll start from the very far back that we got, and that was in the 1700s sometime very early on. Isaac Schwarz had 2 sons, Hirsch and Abraham. Hirsch marries Haja, and they have 3 sons, Moses, Jonas, and Hessel. Abraham Schwarz has the 1 son, Benjamin, which you just saw on the previous family list from 1835, and it showed there that he was about 5 years old. great-grandfather is Hirsch. As I said, he marries Haja and has 3 children, Moses, Jonas, and Hessel. We're going to have a look at what we know about Hirsch's family. He's had the 3 sons. So the first one, born in 1803, was Moses. And Moses has 2 sons, Hyman and Marcus. Hyman, we're not sure what happens with. Marcus, we know, lives from 1836 to 1913. Moses has a son. He has his first son, Hyman Schwarz. And Hyman has one son named Moses Aaron in 1870 who marries Betty. And they have 3 daughters, Jenny, Jinda, and Haja. So we notice a couple of things. They're born, but we don't know their death dates, these 3 girls. But they're certainly born at a time where they would have been in their 40s or so during the Holocaust in Leopold. Second son, Marcus. Now, Marcus we know a bit more about. We know he dies in 1913, but he marries Sloverisa. And if you think back to the memorial wall at the cemetery, I highlighted her and her daughter's name because I was showing you that they definitely died in the Holocaust, probably at Shedki Beach. Interesting thing about Marcus is that he marries a woman some 30 years younger than him. So he dies away, and she's living with their spinster daughter in one of the houses that I went to in Leopold until they're captured and killed in 1941. When I talk about his widow, Sloverisa, and their daughter, Riva Ida, they actually lived at Republicus 30-5 in Labau, Leopold, and I'm here standing at their front door. For Sloverisa and Riva Ida, they did get passports in 1927, these beautiful girls. Whether they were planning then on immigrating, I could assume that they do, but they don't make it out. This is, of course, the mother and her daughter, and their names are listed right beside here and here as well, and where they're from. From the Open Public Foundation in Leopold, where Ilana works, where I spent time with her, she was able to go into the database, and if you look down the bottom, you'll see this work is done by Edward Anders, the historian I've already introduced you to. So what this says is their name and more about their birth, their death, occupation, where they lived. I just showed you that building. And if it says killed and it says 1941, then from our introduction video and the guidebook from the Jewish Museum, you'll have a fair idea of what happened to them. Now, back to Hirsch's second son. Jonas is Yetta's grandfather, born in 1811. He marries a Shine. Remember, we're going to see names where our ancestors are named after ancestors who have passed. That's a normal Jewish tradition. And they had one son who was Yetta's father, Isaac Schwarz. We'll talk about Hirsch's third son just for a minute, born in 1821, but unfortunately we don't know anything more about him, but I didn't want to not include Hessel either. He was on that Guldinga list from 1835, if I remember correctly. but we don't know who he married or anything about his children. Moving along here to Yetta's immediate family. Jonas and Shine have one son, Isaac, and that's Yetta's father. He marries Esther Ullman. If you can see closely that they've both passed away before she immigrates in 1906 to America, and I'm assuming that that would have made it much easier for her to consider immigrating with her husband, that her parents had already passed away. Those are just my thoughts. So I've mentioned that Yetta's parents have passed away, but she has siblings. She's got brothers, Mendel, older, and the twins, Ephraim and Jonas. So we've have twins in our family, as you know, just probably by looking at our close family tree. I always tell my sons they're going to have twins too because twins are in our family. These twins, Ephraim and Jonas, Ephraim passes away. Yetta's born. Her real name is Rochelle Hinda, but her two little sisters also don't live very long, and they pass away, and the known cause was to have been croup. So her parents are gone when she immigrates. Her little sisters are gone when she immigrates. One of her brothers is gone, but she leaves behind two older brothers, and they have children and some cousins and aunts and uncles. Herein we know a little bit about Yetta's oldest brother. He marries and has two sons, Elia Marcus and Asik Josel. We know that Elia Marcus marries, but we don't know when he passes away. But if you look closely, his wife passes away in 1941. The interesting part about the other son is that he moves to South Africa in 1983. So he escapes before the Holocaust arrives, and we have a known address for him when he moved to South Africa of in Cape Town. So we probably have relatives in South Africa that we could pursue some more genealogy in that area of the world as well. Yetta's brother, so as I was saying, he did get a passport in 1920. Here he is here with his wife. The second son, he gets two separate passports. This might have been while he was in the military. It looks like a uniform. He's only 17 years old here, Asik. Again, at 24 years old, on the same passport as his parents. Now, Mendel's already 70. Clive Niece is 60. So this is Yetta's brother, her oldest brother, his wife, and one of their children. Elia Marcus, I was telling you about him. He got a passport in 1927 with his wife, Saipa, at 30 years old and 34. So they may have been planning to immigrate away as well. I would say maybe that's a certainty, or why else would you have a passport? Unfortunately, Elia Marcus, Yetta's nephew and his husband, his wife, have two children, Mary and Eric. Now you'll see the death date says 1941. That's bad news for all of us. It means they passed away in the Holocaust. Mary would have only been 11 and Eric about 8 or 9. Can I take a minute and show the information I got from Alana in her office? If you look down the bottom, you'll see it's from the database of Edward Anders, who I told you about earlier in the presentation. He's worked to collate and keep track of those who perished in the Holocaust. So we know that Elia Marcus's wife passed away, but we don't know, again, what happened to him. It shows where she lived, and we took you there as well. and it showed that she had work. She worked in a button factory, and of course, she had two young children. We see also young Mary Schwartz and young Eric Schwartz in the database as well, showing that they were pupils and would have passed away with their mother. In wrapping up Yetta's immediate family, I want to say that the surviving twin Jonas, we know that he gets married, and we know of one son, Jenok. He was born in 1890, but we don't know what happened to him later in life or whether he married or had children. That's kind of where our information from the experts comes to an end. I want to say I've got probably 35 or so official documents, most of them in Russian, and I'm going to put them at the very end of the presentation so that you can have a slow look at them if you like. I would be remiss if I didn't honor my grandmother Etta and my loving father Erwin Isaacman. Their virtues are many, their deeds are kind and true. They have done more good things than anyone else could do. We salute them, we praise them, we thank them and love them, even more today than we'll ever do. In conclusion, as I was just saying, I highly recommend a trip to Leopai and connecting with our family researchers and historians. Even though this type of research intrigues and frustrates in equal parts, it has been life-affirming being involved with them and this project. Overall, there are many more hidden gems to discover about the Schnitt and Schwarz families in Latvia, so let's keep our ancestors' story alive. Say a little bit something about the Baltics. We were just there. We were a little bit nervous being in Russia, and there were war games off of Lithuania and Latvia the week before our ship took off from Copenhagen. So in the Copenhagen port, the big Chinese warships were in dock, so it was a bit rattling. But there was an article in a newspaper there that said, given the empowerment of nationalists in each of the three Baltic countries and the problems of a Russian-West conflict and expected EU retrenchment, there is a renewed focus on integration in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. There is also political pressure being exerted by Poland on the Baltics and the continued loss of Russian-Baltic USA good economic terms or ties. This means many experts believe that there may be a rapid deterioration in the region's economy, of which an entirely unpredictable political and even military set of consequences could occur. I loved Latvia. I would go there again. But whether it's the smartest thing to do in the world, I don't know. I found it very easy to get there on Scandinavian Airways right out of Copenhagen. Flights were full. They were very strict in the airports. But that's the way things are over there. But I can still recommend a trip there. My details from me to you. Thank you for listening to my presentation. It's obviously my first time recording a PowerPoint presentation and then uploading it to YouTube, so forgive any mistakes or foibles in the middle. But I hope that you enjoyed it anyways. If enjoyed is the wrong word, I would say, for the first two parts, but this part would have a great deal of meaning to all of us, especially for Cousin's Lunch. It took some doing, and it took some work, but I understand where I fall in our lineage, and I hope that helps you and your families too. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great labor of love. So I know enjoyed it is the wrong word, but I know you'll all have found it immensely interesting. I've got about 12 or 14 more documents to show you. I'll just run through them. They might be something that you're particularly interested in, so I didn't want to leave them out.